Have you played Pick 6 from DraftKings yet? Well, what are you waiting for? You better get on it. The playoffs are here, and the time is running out. As the official daily fantasy sports partner of the NFL, DraftKings does fantasy sports like no one else. Play for better payouts on Pick 6. It's super easy to get started. You select 2 or more players, choose if they'll have more or less of a stat, like touchdowns or yardage or sacks and more. Pick 6 is available in most states, including Missouri, California, Texas, Georgia, and more. And DraftKings is making it even sweeter for first-timers. New Pick 6 customers play $5, get $50 in Pick 6 credits. Win more cash on Pick 6. Download the DraftKings Pick 6 app and use code BALLERS. That's code BALLERS for new customers to play $5, get $50 in Pick 6 credits. Only on DraftKings Pick 6. The crown is yours. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. Help is available for problem gambling. Call 888-789-7777 or visit ccpg.org in Connecticut. Must be 18 plus. Age and eligibility restrictions vary by jurisdiction. Pick 6 not available everywhere, including New York and Ontario. Void where prohibited. 1 per new customer. Bonus awarded as non-withdrawable Pick 6 credits that expire in 30 days. Limited time offer. See terms at pick6.draftkings.com/promos.
This episode is brought to you by Love Hurts. Kiwi Kwan has had quite a career, from childhood roles in Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom and The Goonies to a recent Academy Award win for Everything Everywhere All at Once. But now Key finally stars as a leading man in the film Love Hurts. Love Hurts is the perfect date night movie with its mix of over-the-top action, comedy, and a ton of heart. Love Hurts, only at theaters February 7th.
Welcome to the Fantasy Footballers DFS and Betting Podcast with your hosts, Kyle Borganoni and Matthew Betz.
Welcome in. It's Conference Championship weekend here on the Fantasy Footballers DFS and Betting Podcast. I'm your host, Kyle Borganoni, and I am joined, as always, by Matthew. He will attack you from the north, Betz.
What? I mean, I am in the north, up here in Pennsylvania. You're down there in the south, the dirty south, which, by the way, man, what is going on down there in Florida and Georgia? And there's so much snow, like more than what we got. We got like 6.5 inches about 3 days ago. It's been a lot of fun. The girls have been loving it. Unfortunately, it's been freezing, but we have still gotten outside every day, done a little sledding, went for a walk, that kind of stuff. So they're having fun. But can you imagine, like, living on a beach in Florida, or like going there in the winter to be like, we're getting away from the snow for 4 months,
Right?
And it just follows you there and just dumps snow. It has to be complete chaos down there. Like, kind of half joking but mostly serious, like schools are going to be closed for like 3 weeks down there.
We don't have the infrastructure here in the South for any of this stuff. Like I was seeing, I think it was Houston, Texas. Like we don't have any snowplows. And then yes, there are parts of Florida. Like we often vacation to like 30A, that area, which is great. And they experience a ton of snow. I saw a spot in Florida that they almost doubled their like largest snowfall ever this week. Like it was like way above and beyond. And so for a lot of people here in the South, it's like, oh, we don't know how to handle things. I'll just tell you this. My kids have yet to go to school in the new administration of this country.
Kyle's limping into this weekend, everybody. He needs school back in session. I'll let you share more if you want, Kyle, but I feel like we came on the show, was it like 2 weeks ago maybe? And you were like, oh, it's great down here. We just had a nice, snowstorm. We never get snow in Georgia. What a fun experience. My family of 4 were outside. Kyle sends me this lovely family picture. Everybody has a huge smile on their face. What a time to be alive. Fast forward 2 weeks. Kyle's in shambles. I'll let you share more if you want, but I'm thinking about you, buddy.
Yeah, working from home has its perks. Don't get me wrong. I love what I get to do. But when the kids are also home, it's like, this doesn't really change what I'm doing. It does affect, my kids being home every single day because of icy roads. That is the main thing. And my wife has the flu. So then it's one of those things like, she can't really help with the kids. And when your kids do digital learning, which they call DLDs here, my kids are so young that like they can barely log on themselves. So it's basically me showing them where to find stuff. And it's been a funny little dance the last couple of days. So yes, I'm here with you. I'm glad that Betz, I need you to put the team on the back. But I have done a very deep dive on these 4 teams. Like I feel like I know these 4 teams so well that the type of ball we're going to talk about here, I mean, it's going to win somebody a milli.
I would love that. I was kind of thinking about this slate of like, what is it going to take to win a milli? And truthfully, I think it's going to be one of those situations where you just got to throw a dart on like one of these Bills wide receivers, like one of the secondary Chiefs wide receivers. Because like in the Washington game and in the Philly game, like you know who the dudes are, right? It's like obviously Saquon, AJ Brown, Devonta Smith, Terry on the other side. There's not a lot of like sneaky ways to get there, but in this wide receiver rotation that exists between Buffalo and KC, it's the ultimate battle of like wide receivers don't matter is kind of what I feel like. I feel like hitting on that guy, and quite frankly, I have no idea who that is going to be. Hopefully we can figure it out today. Is going to be the key to the milli. So I might MME this week, Kyle. Not the milli, that's not my style, but I like these shorter slates for an MME perspective because you can get exposure.
Tell people what MME is.
Yeah, mass multi-entry. Basically, it's the 150 sets or the 20 max sets where you can kind of spread out your exposure a little bit more and you can take a little over or underweight stance without full fading guys. Just a different strategy. But when we talk about these short slates, with whether it be showdown or 2 games, there's so much more variance that exists, and I'm just going to try to lean into that, I think, a little bit more.
I wish I could join you. I don't know if I'm there in terms of life right now.
You don't have time for that, Kyle? Come on.
Sorry, honey. I know that you're gone. And I joked with Betz the other day. I said, my wife left me for meds in a sick bed. And but I do have some angles that I think will be important. We'll talk about it here. See if we agree. So we will talk about these games, how to stack them up, pace of play, and then we will give our slate breakers. Once again, Betz has not revealed to me. I feel like this wasn't always your thing. Usually you'll message me a couple hours before like, dude, I'm cooking. I got my guy. You're going to kind of work through this podcast and see where you're at.
Yeah, it's actually kind of liked it. It's worked out decently well. Last week was Jaden Daniels, Washington. What a game. That was so fun. The Jaden Daniels play last week, and I can't remember who I had the week before, but what's been different about our kind of content schedule now for the playoffs is we've been doing our show, and then we have our DraftKings and FanDuel articles come out the day after, or the day that you're listening to this. So it allows me to get way more different angles on the slate, talking to you and kind of talking through it, that I've actually liked it a lot more. Maybe we'll have to figure out if we can switch that up for next year for regular season. But needless to say, I am going to hopefully find the right guy over the next 45-ish minutes that wins you the milli. So we'll see.
I love it. If you want to jump in, Betz mentioned our articles, dfspass.com. We are still free. If you want to play with us, we're going to go all the way through the Super Bowl. We'll have a ton of Super Bowl props, different angles to give with that. And I just want to say, a lot of you guys, you have been with us for a while with the DFS and Betting podcast, formerly the DFS podcast. I mean, that was a huge change for everybody when we changed up that. But then also with the DFS Pass, we've gotten some great feedback over the years of, hey, do you think you could add this in? In a couple of weeks, I will reach out, especially in Discord, for some of our favorite people there to kind of give some feedback of like, hey, this was valuable. I really like this past year. We had a ton of people that were able to give testimonials of here's how I won, or here's how this helped me in best ball in different formats. So anyway, really appreciate you guys. DFSpass.com or reach out on Discord. We are still here going throughout the playoffs. So moving on.
State of the main slate.
We're going to look at just 2 games because that's all the football that we get anymore. Right now, looking at the lines from DraftKings, Washington is a 6-point road dog in Philly, a team that they just got very fortunate to beat last time against the Kenny Pickett's of the world. But the game's at 47.5, and the KC game and Buffalo's also at 47.5. I have very different takes about these totals.
Interesting.
When we get into these games. So what do you think about, I mean, it's rare to get 2 games that had the same total when they first started.
Yeah, and I haven't really seen either one move throughout the week. I mean, obviously the lines opened up immediately Sunday night, and there's been some movement as far as the spread. Like the Eagles spread opened 4.5, immediately went out to 5, 5.5, now 6. And, KC, I know that there's been a lot of bettors backing Buffalo, but the line and the spread haven't moved a ton yet. We'll see if that shifts. But yeah, it's kind of interesting. In my head, I logged on and I was like, oh, it'll probably be a little higher, I assume, just for the Eagles and, Jane Daniels because of how prolific they've been. And Chiefs games have kind of played to the under all season. And I thought, when we log in, we'll see those totals be different. And it's interesting to see them have the same total. So I don't really have a strong take on either as far as the over-under. So hopefully you can point us in one direction if there is one game to attack.
Yeah, when I put together the GPS score of these two games, Washington and Philadelphia's at 3.75 out of 5, and Buffalo and Kansas City's at 3.5. So these are two games that are definitely trending in a good direction. The total clearly reflects that. But before we go into breaking down these games and how we stack, we have a ton of data in front of us. And I think that's kind of what's causing me to pause a little bit and consider what the field is going to do. We're privileged that we have two games between the Commanders and Eagles this year to kind of say here's how they played with Jane Daniels. We're also super privileged that we have a ton of Josh Allen versus Patrick Mahomes to look at over the last couple of years. And that kind of feeds into what we're going to do. So I think it's tempting to kind of pigeonhole ourselves and say, this game will go this way because in week 11, this is what happened. But both of these games were actually in week 11, and then the Eagles and Commanders in week 16. So do you feel because we've done so much analysis of Allen versus Mahomes over the years. I was going back and I think I've written 5 pace of play articles just on those two alone. So do you feel like the public as a whole feels we kind of know what's going to happen because we've seen these teams before?
Yeah, I do still think there is a little bit of the remembering that game from a couple years ago, which was the Gabe Davis explosion and the Tyreek Hill last-minute touchdown that just was probably the most fun football game to watch ever for me personally, was what we all remember of these Mahomes and Allen type shootouts. And so I think people will kind of gravitate towards that idea. But obviously these teams are way different, and you've seen that, a lot this year. We've kind of been waiting for the Mahomes huge games to come, and last week again we were disappointed where it was kind of a slugfest. And on the Bills side, they've just been so bully ball focused with an extra offensive lineman running the ball a ton. Josh Allen kind of did a Jalen Hurts impression last week where he barely had to throw in that game. And, it's interesting to kind of think about the angles of how this game could go between those two teams. But yeah, I definitely think just copying and pasting of here's what happened the first time, so it'll just happen again kind of thing can definitely lead you in the wrong direction because, both coaching staffs know that, right? It's they know how to kind of morph what they did. If it worked, maybe they run it back. If it didn't work, what are they going to do differently? And that might affect play calling, might affect player usage. All those things are definitely worth thinking about on this slate.
Yeah, so it's wild to think about. We have 9 games between Allen and Mahomes dating back to 2020. Now, those totals back then, this feels like your grandpa's DFS. We won't even be able to talk about this in a few years. People will be oh, that's how DFS used to be. The totals from those first 5 games, 55, 55, 56.5, 54.5, 54. That's what we used to start with. And the last 4 have been 49, 45, 46, and right now 47.5. The Bills have won a good amount recently. And I think we kind of forget that because every single year in the playoffs, we go, oh, Allen can't get over the hump. Now everybody's going to say that about Lamar. And it's kind of been Mahomes figuring it out along the way. But I would say that this is the Bills team that is built to finally beat the Chiefs. If I were to give an initial take, I think this team, in being able to run the ball effectively in a couple of different ways, not just Josh Allen saving them, but it's James Cook, it's Ty Johnson out of the backfield, even Ray Davis getting red zone looks. I think this Bills team is set up differently. Now, I also want that to happen. Do you feel Jason put out a poll? We all want the Bills to win, right?
Yeah. Just in sports, if you're not a fan of the team that's been the dynasty, it's been like this with the Patriots, 7-8 years ago, whatever it's been, where it's if you're not a Patriots fan, you're done. You want to just move on. And in this era recently, it's we all love Mahomes because he's just super talented and all that. But if you're a fan of the NFL and you're not a Chiefs fan, you're ready to see somebody else play in the Super Bowl. So I do think, and I put that a little bit in the Vegas report, which is in the DFS Pass. You can check that out. I put some notes on how much of the percentage of bets are on different sides of these games. And a lot of people are backing Buffalo. I'm not saying that's wrong, but just like the public perception is, okay, we're done with KC. We've seen it. We've had enough. Let's get this Bills team to the Super Bowl. So I think one interesting way to play this, just from a DFS standpoint, game theory, is like if that's how the betting market is treating it, maybe you just lean into the Chiefs. You're winning this game. The same is true for Washington, where like I'm going to try not to be biased during the show because, as everyone knows, I'm a diehard Eagles fan. But Jaden Daniels is so fun. Everybody loves Jaden Daniels. You can't put on any like major sports network, ESPN, everywhere on Twitter, whatever you're looking at. It's all about Jaden Daniels and this Washington team right now. So this is like America's team, and they're getting a lot of bets in the betting market. So, and the lines moved against them. So I think there are some ways that you can kind of quote unquote fade the public in some of these different, game scripts that might play out. Definitely something to consider and look at on a small slate.
I play this game of Uno. It's actually an NFL Uno with my kids.
Oh, fun.
And they're not allowed to put down the card unless they name the team. Okay. So it's a stupid game that I'm trying to train my kids, they got to know the teams. But whenever they put down Washington, they always forget what the team name is because it obviously has changed a couple times. And when you look at the logo, they're like, so Truman always calls it the Washington. That's the capital. That's like the only thing that he can remember.
Close enough.
Yeah, it's not bad. The Patriots, they just call them the Americans.
Also pretty close.
I know, it's pretty good. Let's talk about how we think people will construct their rosters, because you and I will give our takes of how we think these game flows, but ultimately it comes down to, in DFS, playing a game with the salary structure. And if you just look at the salaries, we have them listed in the DFS Pass. I have a first look article. My first reaction is there are players way too cheap for what we're used to. I mean, Patrick Mahomes is still sitting at just $6K, so he's going to project really, really well. Jaden Daniels' price didn't move at all from this past week, despite what he did. And then Saquon is by far the most expensive player. When you look at him, you're like, oh man, do I really need to pay up for Saquon? When you adjust for salary and you just look at the rest of the field, it's like, well, yeah, you can fit him in this week.
Yes, and DraftKings and FanDuel will both do this on these kind of highlighted, slates where everybody wants to play in the playoffs and that sort of thing. So you get a pricing dynamic where, like, at running back, it's Saquon, and then you got to scroll to get down to like anything meaningful as far as salary. And when you look at kind of the running back pool, it's like Saquon is the obvious workhorse for a very run-heavy team. And then the Washington guys, they split work, right? James Cook's going to lose a few touches to Ty Johnson, maybe Ray Davis at the goal line, Josh Allen at the goal line. Isaiah Pacheco and Kareem Hunt are a full 50-50 split right now. So like you can poke holes in pretty much every single running back on the slate, not named Saquon, which means in small field, Saquon Barkley is going to be 90%, 80%, like something just ridiculous. And I can't say it's wrong. I mean, look what this guy is doing. But that's the dynamic. It's like Saquon and pick your RB2. And then at wide receiver, nobody is more expensive than $7K. AJ Brown is at the top at $6,800 on DraftKings. So you can fit whoever you want. You mentioned the quarterbacks are cheap. So it is kind of one of those build however you want to type of slates, which I think those are fun. But I do kind of wish DraftKings at least made it a decision point on Saquon, because that's the key is like, do you want to fade him on a small slate where you might need even like a floor game? Like if he gives you 18 and he's quote unquote bad for his standards, like that might still be needed, on a 2-game slate. So I wish they made him like 10K or something to make it really a challenge and a decision point. But I think the way they have it, it's going to be really hard to talk negatively about Saquon.
It would be kind of fun if we got to create a contest in our DraftKings league that you and I got to like specify where you can't use Saquon. It's the no Saquon contest. So you are just having to build, and you'll probably have a bunch of salary left over, to be honest, around these other 5K running backs. So I'm seeing builds where you mentioned Saquon's going to be 75, 90%, somewhere around there. And then a lot of Austin Eckler and maybe Kareem Hunt. That's the direction I see, because Eckler you're looking at as a pass catcher who still is getting some red zone looks as well. You saw last week, like in some of their 2-minute drill stuff, it was like, okay, well, it's going to be Eckler here. And then they just kind of left him in when they got in close. So he's going to project well. I think Kareem Hunt is the one that I want over Pacheco, and the pricing works. So I think those are the running back combinations you'll see. We'll talk more about James Cook. It's not a great spot for him, in my opinion, but I mean, he's clearly the next best running back on this slate in terms of projection and price. Wide receivers cheap, man. Like AJ Brown is priced as the wide receiver 1, but just to give context, Last year, Amon-Ra was the wide receiver one at 7,900. And so you're basically paying $1,000 less for him, McLaurin, everybody else than what we're used to paying. So you can fit in a bunch of dudes at wide receiver. And I think the question is, what do you do with Buffalo and KC guys?
Yeah, we'll talk about the spot for all these guys here in a minute, but that definitely is a key. And I think a lot of optimals too probably are going to give you 2 tight ends like Kelsey and Kincaid or Goddard and Ertz or something along those lines. Because when you look at those cheaper wide receivers, if you scroll below Kelsey and you go to 4,500 and below, Hollywood Brown, again, just like last week, is fine, I guess. But it's like Amari Cooper's running 12 routes a game. Olamide Zaccheaus has done nothing. Keon Coleman's running 15 routes a game. You can poke holes in every single player below 5,500 at wide receiver. And so I think a lot of the field is going to say, I don't want to mess around in this uncertain situation of all these guys, and I'll just play 2 tight ends. So I think just from top level view, if you're playing optimally, small field, cash game style contest, I think 2 tight end is probably right. For large field stuff, if these wide receivers happen to hit, which I truthfully don't know how often they hit, but when they do, you're going to win a lot on the field if you're not playing that tight end and flex. So that's one way that I think about, attacking the slate.
Yeah, I agree. There's wide receivers on this slate that are really hard to click. Like DeAndre Hopkins has not really proved to us that he's mattered over the last 2 months. And yet, you could see a player like that catching a touchdown, Amari Cooper, and they're optimal on the slate. So we'll talk about that. Let's take a quick break, and then we'll break down these games.
Imagine what's possible when learning doesn't get in the way of life. At Capella University, our game-changing FlexPath learning format lets you set your own deadlines so you can learn at a time and pace that works for you. It's an education you can tailor to your schedule. That means you don't have to put your life on hold to pursue your professional goals. Instead, enjoy learning your way and earn your degree without missing a beat. A different future is closer than you think with Capella University. Learn more at capella.edu.
Build a routine with Ollie that supports your wellness needs, like getting your daily vitamins and minerals with Ollie's multi-gummies, or keeping your mood upbeat with all the vitamin D in Hello Happy. Give your gut health some support with probiotics, and wake up feeling refreshed after taking Ollie Sleep. Do wellness on your terms. Find Ollie at a Walmart or Target near you or at ollie.com. These statements have not been evaluated by the Food and Drug Administration. This product is not intended to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any disease.
Stack Attack.
All right, first game we're going to talk about is the Washington Commanders at the Philadelphia Eagles. The line is 47.5, and it was bet up to Philly -6. My initial take is 6 points is a lot. My other take is to go, okay, I've got 2 games to work with here, right? Week 11, week 16. Those games were so different too. That first game was on Thursday night, and it was just a weird game because Washington was up at 1 point, 12-10 heading into the fourth quarter, and then Philly scores 20 unanswered points, and then you get some points at the very end where Zach Ertz gets an octopus, right? Touchdown, and then the 2-point conversion. And the score looks a lot closer, but it wasn't really that close. So that game, and then the next game, Hurts is out, and it's Kenny Pickett. It's hard to use all of the data from that, but I do think there's some interesting points. But where do you want to start first?
Yeah, I think one thing that's interesting on this slate from the Washington side is to kind of look at the games that they've played recently, right? Where they've played Tampa and they've played the Lions. And it's really hard to pick 2 better spots for opposing pass games than playing Tampa and playing the Lions in the Dome. With the Lions just having so many injuries, and Tampa's been a pass funnel all season. So in the recent weeks, the last month plus, this version of the Philly defense is going to be the toughest test for Jayden Daniels. He's literally passed every single test every single week since he's been in the league. So I'm not saying he's not going to pass it, but just for context, I'm hesitant to chase the efficiency of what we've seen recently. And especially for guys like De'Ami Brown and those types where it's man, how long can he do this? Because we have a pretty big sample of De'Ami Brown not doing anything in the NFL. And we have a very short term of him being the wide receiver too. So my first take is I kind of want to trust the line movement and also understand that this is a very different situation for Jayden Daniels and the offense as a whole. You throw in that they just lost their best offensive lineman to a torn ACL this past week, Sam Cosmi. one of their guards. That's a really tough test against Jalen Carter and the interior of the Eagles' pass defense and rush defense. So, I don't want to say that I'm lower on Jane Daniels than market because I will have exposure to him. But I think last week, I made in my slate breaker, it was like, man, this spot is beautiful. The Lions give up so much rushing production to quarterbacks. They've got so many injuries. I think this is a spot where I might come in lower and just trust the line movement. I don't know if it's right, but just trust it and lean away a little bit from Washington. Again, just a tougher spot on the road. You also factor in the Eagles have seen this guy now twice. That's a pretty big advantage when you think about opposing matchups with what Vic Fangio might do. And in that game where they had to come back and they won 36-33, they blitzed the heck out of Jaden Daniels. 20 blitzes in that game was by far the most that they had the entire season. And what did Jaden Daniels do? Lit him up for 9.4 yards per pass attempt, no sacks taken. You cannot blitz Jaden Daniels. We saw that last week with Aaron Glenn and the Lions. He destroyed him. So I think you see a lot of, 4 pass rushers drop back in zone and say, make you beat us with kind of with play volume. And that's been a concern for opposing offenses against Philly all year. They are number 1 in the NFL in terms of adjusting for 60 minutes opposing offenses running plays. So if you think that stuff happens, I think the ceiling outcomes for Jane Daniels and this offense are less likely than what we've seen over the last 2 weeks.
I think that's a good nuanced approach. I think what I'm hearing you say is NFL-wise, looking at an NFL game, throwing out fantasy for a second, this is tough for him. But at his price in DFS, it doesn't mean you're just erasing it and saying, oh, he's not going to do anything because there's a quarterback who runs the ball is only $7K.
For sure.
So kind of have a nuanced approach of how you're looking at this. I totally agree with you. I think Vic Fangio is going to go back and go, okay, so that didn't really work. What were we doing blitzing that much where in week 11, they ran zone 85% of the time. It was one of their highest, and they had a ton of success with it. And then you look in week 16, it was a ton more man coverage. I guess they were just trying to spy him, and he just shredded them. But it's really hard for me to use all of those stats and use all those game flows when it was kind of Kenny Pickett and them trying to milk the clock in the second half. It really was just okay, let's get some field goals. Let's try to get out of here with a victory. And with 6 seconds left, they said, oh, let's not cover Jamison Crowder. So, yeah, so let's just stay with the Washington side. If that's your lean, and I do kind of agree with you, I wrote out a couple of different game scripts here of what I think the game how it's going to lean. One of them is just called Jaden Magic. And I write some game flow of if Jaden is Jaden, this is how it could work. If the Eagles defense shows up, which I think is the most likely outcome, then I think you're just not going to see a ton of splash plays. I think they're going to sit back in zone. And it's basically going to be, this is a Saquon game. This is a defense that's set to crush at home. So you build with Saquon defense and then figure out your bring back on the Washington side and kind of go from there. That's the lean based on the line that I'm seeing.
Agreed. And I think that will be pretty popular. We just talked about, I think Eagles defense is going to be the most rostered defense on this slate. And I think Saquon obviously is going to be the most rostered, not just running back, but player on this slate. So those two together is not unique by any means. But when you look at the line movement, home favorite, how much work he's getting, that all makes sense to me. So yeah, I'm with you in that. It's popular, but I think it's popular for good reason.
The place where Jane Daniels has been awesome this year, and Cliff, I think the biggest difference between Cliff Kingsbury in Arizona and here is what they're doing on second down. You remember in Arizona, it'd be why are they running the ball on second down?
Yeah.
I mean, you and I have talked about that on a couple of teams. Bobby Slowick did that for a while. We're God, this is the most inefficient play you could possibly do on second down, where you're just trying to have positive plays. And I looked this up. Jane Daniels this year, the team is third in EPA on second down. And in intermediate areas, they have the 6th highest pass rate, and he's scrambling on almost 13% of his dropbacks. Anything over 10% is insane. So you're getting these insane positive plays that give them manageable downs. And then they're also a team that you have to factor in. They get extra plays. They go for it on 4th down. So there is a scenario with Jane Daniels where they just continue to sustain drives, and that makes me like Olamide Zaccheaus a little bit more, gives him a little bit more boost against these coverages where everybody else gets to sit back. And so in that instance where you think Jaden does come through, I'm actually double stacking him this week with somebody like McLaurin, Zaccheaus, and then just bringing him back with Saquon.
Makes a lot of sense. I do think that is, on these small slates, you got to find little leverage points kind of along the way. I think Zacchaeus over De'Ami Brown is one of those on this slate. And
The little man,
don't
the wee
hear
man,
what I'm not
Zacchaeus.
saying. I don't think either is like a great wide receiver, right? But this is DFS. This is a game. And De'Ami Brown, to his credit, he's been very good recently, and he is running more routes than Zacchaeus and all those things. So on paper, like, he is a better play. He's a little bit more expensive. He's $4,400 compared to Zacchaeus, who's $3,900. But you talked about kind of the coverage scheme. I think we're going to see a lot of zone. It's actually been Zacchaeus who's been a little bit better in those systems. And so just if you're saying, oh, the Commanders are trailing, they have a lot more 3 wide receiver sets out there. I mean, who's to say Zacchaeus isn't going to give you 10 points and Brown gives you 5, right? Like that's a huge leverage point on a small slate. So I think both are very fragile, but you're playing away from ownership when you play Zacchaeus instead of Brown. So that's another stance I'll probably take on this small slate, is just play more Zacchaeus than Brown. Though if I'm being honest, like, I don't think either guy is an incredible play, even at these prices.
Right.
So it's more of just kind of that second guy that's not the obvious of Terry or Zach Ertz.
Right. I think that's us saying, I don't think there's a big difference between these players, and yet the field thinks there is, based on the route rate and what they've seen the last couple weeks from De'Ami Brown.
Right.
Of like, oh, this guy's awesome. It's like, no, this guy might not get a contract next year from somebody. I mean, probably from his playoff performance, but he's a free agent. So I think Zacchaeus is probably my bigger stance. What about the running backs? Are you interested in Eckler, B-Rob? It's hard to click B-Rob. I hate it, but it's hard.
Yeah, I kind of talked him down last week, and he was pretty good on the ground. Obviously, that helped because of the game script where we didn't really project Washington to play from ahead, obviously. Nobody did, but they surprised us, and they were able to get that going with Brian Robinson. I think the same outcome has to happen here. You know, last week he had 15 carries to Eckler's 6. Again, just in that positive game script, Eckler still ran more routes. So I think it's the same conversation. If you are playing your lineup as if Washington goes into Philly and pulls off the upset, I think Brian Robinson is a very good leverage play on Austin Eckler. If you think that the line is right and you agree with the line movement, then I would play more Eckler in those lineups and kind of correlate that. So yeah, I think Jaden with Eckler is fine. Just correlate him as like a pass catcher in this game. But I definitely think that like game script matters in terms of how you project either guy.
Yes. I wrote up a script that was Commanders getting an early lead, and then the Eagles passing attack is something that really matters. So we'll talk about that. But I think Eckler's the easiest click here. If you look at his target share, and we know that targets are more valuable, especially on a full PPR site. But I do think there is a scenario where B-Rob gets an early touchdown, and at his price, that might be all you need.
Right.
You know, it's like he ends up with 60 combined yards and a touchdown. It's like, that's going to work at his price point. Any thoughts on Terry McLaurin? Because he was on an insane streak, and then when they met in week 11, he had his one catch, and that is burned into my mind of like, oh, against the Eagles, he did that. Now, the second time, he was 5 for 60 and a score. So if I just were to throw those two games out and just say, how do you like Terry McLaurin in this game against cover 3 and cover 4? He just seems like the most obvious stacking partner. You can't just fade him, especially 6,700 is nothing.
Yeah, it's cheap, especially just, I mean, he's been so good. Like, I know we shouldn't get stuck game long watching, but it's really hard not to with Terry, where it's just like every week that Jaden smashes, you know, Terry's usually coming along for the ride because he does get everything, whether it's like the short stuff, as you saw last week, took the screen to the house. He also gets a lot of end zone targets. So it's just like, man, if you're betting on Jaden, I'd have a tough time not including Terry in those scenarios. Obviously, there's outcomes that exist where Jane Daniels runs for 80 yards and a touchdown, and one of his only passing touchdown goes to like Zach Ertz. Like, that obviously is possible, but I just think most likely scenario here is that if Jane Daniels is going to hit, Terry McLaurin is coming with. So yeah, I think most of my Daniels stacks will have Terry McLaurin.
All right, on the Eagles side, I'm not going to really spend any more time talking about Saquon. We just did an episode on the main show about the truth about running backs. It was the most yards before contact of any running back since 2016, since we started tracking that stat. So the offensive line, Saquon Barkley, and then the Washington defensive line allowing the highest adjusted yards before contact is a dream. It's the best matchup in the playoffs. So play Saquon. That's it. That's all I need to start with.
I don't really have anything else to add except for the fact that his quarterback is also injured. So it's like, man, they're going to give him the ball 25 times. Like, I think if you want leverage on this slate, like if you're looking for like, how can I get leverage on the slate? Saquon Barkley's going to be 80% owned. So that's how you do it. But I don't think it's a very, there's not a lot of data that says it's a bad idea, is all I'll say.
Yeah. No, I have scenarios in my head of how you could do it, but I won't even say them out loud. I don't even want to mention them.
Don't you dare mention the possibility that exists.
Yep. It never happened. We never even mentioned it. I do think, though, the main conversation point is Hurts. And I want to hear your perspective about injury stuff, being boots on the ground and our injury guy. But I think that is the key to figuring out the game flow here in a couple of leverage points. Like, if you're going to play Saquon, that's fine. I think some people might look at this game and go, well, I'm playing Saquon, and then Daniels has the stack bringing back. But it's like, the passing game is still part of what the Eagles do. You're not going to get a ton of attempts. And I do think there's some good matchups. So what do we know about Hurts' injury status?
Yeah, so obviously if you watched last week's game, you saw him get that left knee kind of like stuck underneath him, bent awkwardly. No structural damage. He did not have like sometimes the offensive linemen, not sometimes, they always wear those braces that are, the thicker ones that are more of like the rigid support on the sides. He did not have
one. They're big boys.
They're big boys. He did not have that type of brace with that like external support on when he came back into the game. It was more of like a sleeve compression. So by all accounts, I think that he will be mostly fine by Sunday. Does that mean that he's going to be the same dynamic runner in the open field? And he's not Lamar Jackson by any means, but like that high-end outcome I don't think is as likely. I still think they'll run him a little bit. I still think they're going to use the tush push, but like, last week we saw him in the early part of that game rip off that 45-yard run or whatever it was against the Rams, where he had to break a tackle and then accelerate and beat guys down the field. I don't think that's as likely. So I definitely think you should dock Hurts' rushing efficiency a little bit, but I think he'll be healthy enough to play. I think they're going to tush push, like I said. So I would say a slight downgrade, but not a huge. It's not changing how I'm playing Hurts, because in DFS, when Hurts hits a ceiling, it's either efficiency as a passer or 2 rushing touchdowns because of the tush push, right? Like that's pretty much it for Jalen Hurts recently. So I'm not changing a lot about how I think about it.
Based on the pricing on this slate, let's say that Hurts, let's say he does get 2 touchdowns on the ground. It doesn't necessarily mean that Saquon's a bad play, because we said raw points matter. Let's say Saquon goes for over 100, but the scores get vultured, or he only scores once and Hurts scores 1 on the ground and 1 passing. At 6,500, I still think that it's possible for him to be a good play. You're just not going to see crazy volume. It's not going to be one of those things where you see him drop back, 30, 35 times. So I do think there are routes where you play a Hurts skinny. Like, let's just say you play with AJ Brown. It doesn't mean you're just out on Saquon. Like, I still think there's room based on the pricing and based on there's no other running backs on this slate where the Eagles put up 25 to 30 points and you capture all 3 touchdowns with those 3 dudes.
For sure. And what I think you're saying is like you could play Hurts with Saquon, and I don't think a lot of the field is going to do that.
Correct.
And he saw 4 targets last week, Saquon did. So there is something to be said about some of these pass attempts that could go Saquon's way. You don't necessarily need these massive runs to hit for him to be in the optimal lineup. So I like that call quite a bit, especially because this Commanders defense, last week against the Lions, give up 30 first downs and 7.7 yards per play. Now it's the Lions, like it's been one of the best offenses in football all year, so I get that, but like this Washington defense has kind of struggled, right? So like there's multiple ways Philly can beat you, and I think including Hurts with Saquon makes a lot of sense. You also consider that on the defensive line, they've got an injury they're dealing with. Bobby Wagner's playing through a high ankle sprain. Like I think Saquon can get loose in the pass game here too. So I like that call. I think that's a really interesting angle, and it's not like Hurts won't be rostered and Saquon won't be rostered, but the combination of them together, I think, will be less likely than it should in terms of like how often it happens.
Yeah, the vibes of him being injured plus Saquon plus the matchup says you're not going to see those together quite as much. I mean, the Commanders have run a ton more man. We've kind of highlighted that the last couple of weeks against the Buccaneers, against the Lions. Like they're just playing more man. It's the Dan Quinn way. You're also seeing more single high looks where you bring a safety up, especially against Saquon, and you add another defender in the box to try to stop the run. So I think the Eagles' success this week is going to come down to 2 things. Are they going to let Jane Daniels just do whatever he wants and scramble? And then the second thing is, can Jalen Hurts beat single high safety looks? And as a passer, like that will be the key for them getting to the Super Bowl. Saquon's going to be a huge part of it, but if like Jalen Hurts is like a dud in the passing game. And he has games like that, man. I'm sorry. Like, there are games where you go, oh, this is not a great NFL passer. This is a good fantasy quarterback, but not necessarily like a passer of the football, as they say. What is your take on the pass catchers on the Eagles side?
I feel like we say it every week. I feel like a big A.J. Brown game is coming.
me too, man.
At some point, right? Obviously, the first game, it was a complete dud. Barely even saw targets. That was the book on the sideline game. This past week, we talked about that on the show. It was like they're going to give him looks. Like when this happens on the sideline and it's in the media, they say, watch this, and they give A.J. Brown targets. 7 targets last week. Did have a uncharacteristic drop. He also dropped that one on the right sideline, like right at the goal line. I'm not sure if that was snow related or if he slipped or what, but like how often does A.J. Brown not catch that football? Like he probably catches it 9 out of 10 times. So yeah, I feel like it's a great spot to go right back to A.J. Brown, especially considering his splits versus man coverage. And if you're the Commanders, how do you look at what Saquon has done against you? 29 carries, 150 yards, 2 touchdowns, 26 carries, 146 yards, 2 touchdowns in those matchups. How do you not say, no matter what, the way that you have to beat us is with Jalen Hurts as a passer? If I was the Washington defense, that's what I would do. And I think if that happens, A.J. Brown is going to have plenty of opportunities.
The tight ends interest me in this game because, one, the former teammates, they're buddies. You know, Ertz and Goddard. Just it's kind of sad to see Ertz in this spot, but he's been really, really good. Goddard's been involved, 10 targets in the playoffs. At their price point, $4,300 for Ertz, $4,500 for Goddard, like you're going to see them as a lot of flex options. Or tight end, you know, you want to put Kelsey in your flex for later on. But I don't really have a ton of interest in Smith. Dotson isn't even in my player pool.
Dude, Jahan.
Revenge.
It is a revenge game. I kind of forgot.
He forgets to.
Yeah. You can throw a dart in a large field millie if you want, but there's no data that says you should. He did have a touchdown in the first game. Yeah, he's going to get 1 or 0 targets most likely. So, yeah, hard to go there.
I remember last year playing those Sam Howell games, and I was like, I'm playing Dotson this week. I'm not playing McLaurin. And it took off. I thought, man, rest of the season, Dotson's going to really be coming on. Nope. Yeah, I kind of like the over in this situation.
Interesting. I don't have a strong take on the total. I think the line movement is probably right. I think 6, if it gets to 6.5, I would take Washington. I think they can hang around and keep it close. And, you know, you kind of saw that last week with Philly. Like, they just let Stafford and the Rams hang all around too long, and they could have lost that game. Like, truthfully, they could have lost that game. So, yeah, Washington is very live here. I'm not going to be biased about that in any means. I would take Washington plus the 6, but I don't have a strong take on the total.
I think I will be building my game scripts, like thinking about my lineups as if this game was hitting the over. That's like how I'm probably going to approach it. And do you think you will have more exposure to this game than the other game?
I think I will. I just like the way that you can attack this game as far as like a little bit of a different leverage points, like mentioned Zacchaeus, Hurts with Saquon, that type of thing.
Yes.
Man, the Buffalo wide receiver room is so challenging. The KC wide receiver room is so challenging. I actually kind of like the under in that KC game. But so yeah, if there's one that I'm going to probably go a little bit more overweight on, I think it's this game.
Yeah, I think when you look at the other game, it's like Kelsey is the one you can have most confidence in. Worthy is there too. And then beyond that, you're like, do I get some cheap Kincaid targets? Like where's the ball going for Buffalo? So I think it's just easier for me to have confidence in this game. Let's take a quick break, and then we will talk about that game. All right, we're back talking Buffalo and Kansas City. Kansas City is 1.5 point home favorite because, well, they only ever play games in Kansas City at home in the playoffs. I went back through Travis Kelce's career. He has played 2 road playoff games, and he's been in the playoffs every single year since 2015.
That's crazy.
That's it.
That's crazy.
They're just that good. It's that frustrating to look at, but you also respect it a ton. You respect Andy Reid. You respect that this team finds a way to win. For fantasy purposes, though, it is not always a goldmine when it comes to DFS. A lot of weeks you look at the Chiefs, you go, man, I wish I would have stayed away from that team. I wish I would have played Kelsey and nobody else. Those are the kind of things that usually you walk away from. But I went back through and looked at all the games that these teams have played all the way back through 2020 and where they were. So if you want to look at those, you can find those in the DFS pass. Where do you want to start the conversation?
I think we got to start on the Chiefs side of this one. The offense was really bad last week, man. 4.2 yards per play. And maybe that was some rust. They hadn't played in, 30 days or something since the starters were in there. But the offense was pretty underwhelming last week. And I played a lot of Mahomes on the smaller 2-game slate just because I was like, these stacks are so cheap. And we talked about that. And Marquise Brown did nothing. And what do you know? In this year of DFS, we go right back to the same player. He's probably going to be the second most highly rostered player on this slate, behind only Saquon, I'd think, just because, again, he's cheap. So I think he's a huge decision point on this slate, is how you're handling him, because when he saw 2 targets, Kelsey was it last week, and then Worthy was still fine, saw 6 targets. And when you look at the routes run, it was Worthy at the top, 28 routes, Marquise Brown, 23, DeAndre Hopkins, 13, Juju ran 13 routes. Juju and DeAndre Hopkins are splitting time, which is just a wild sentence to say. So I have a tough time saying positive things right now about these ancillary pieces. So where are you at with Hollywood? Because, again, if the field is going to play him at a 45, 50% clip on a small slate, it feels like a really good spot to get some leverage.
That's what I did last week. And it feels like I should go right back to it again. This just hasn't been a player that has given us valuable targets in such a long time. Think about their wide receiver room if you were playing fantasy football in 2019. That's what we're dealing with here. Hopkins, Juju, Hollywood.
All these guys were first and second round
Kareem
picks
Hunt.
back in fantasy in those years. I will say the Bills have some pretty significant injury issues on the defensive side of the ball that I think will matter. Taylor Rapp dealing with a hip injury, we'll see on him. Matt Milano has a hamstring injury, we'll see on him. Christian Benford is in concussion protocol. If any of those guys miss, or if 2 of those guys miss, it's going to change a lot about how I feel about Mahomes and the Chiefs offense, where I think the efficiency could be a lot better than what we saw last week. But I think in general, to me, it feels like an under game. I don't know if you agree, but it's tough to get into these secondary Chiefs guys is kind of my feeling.
Yeah, under is my lean. And when I wrote out the game script, the way that I kind of phrased it and I talked about last week is they play this flag football style, the Chiefs do, where a ton of his attempts are going to be 10 yards in. And he's going to have a ton of stuff behind the line of scrimmage, but they're always positive plays. That's the part where you can't really poke holes and say this isn't good for the NFL. They rank 4th in EPA per play on third down. So the biggest thing about the Chiefs that is so frustrating, if you've been watching this for years, is just so many back-breaking plays where you're all right, it's 3rd and 6. It's 3rd and 7 or whatever it is. You're they just get a stop here. Feels like we've not got a stop for years.
And they never pick up a big play. It's always 3rd and 6 and they pick up 7 yards. That's always how it is.
It's Noah Gray right at the sticks.
Yep.
Okay, first down. Here we go. I found this stat out that Mahomes ranks 3rd in completion percentage on third down this year, and he's scrambling on 10.5% of his dropbacks on third down. Okay. He has as many total scrambles on third down this year as Jaden Daniels. So we always talk about his running and how in the playoffs you get a little boost. So I think Mahomes at his price point on this slate, you look through the options, you're man, these are the dudes of fantasy the last couple of years. Josh Allen, Jalen Hurts, Jaden Daniels now. Mahomes is the cheapest still. And so, everyone's going to go back to the same thing.
Buttlicker, our prices have never been lower.
And it's really hard to not click the button. So I think Mahomes is, if he was 7,000, I'd be man, I'm not paying that price. But he makes sense at this price point and the way that this team plays of just converting third downs. And I think Kelsey's the obvious stacking partner. So I think Mahomes is probably going to be 1 or 2 in roster percentage on this slate.
Agreed. And I think the interesting way to play him is trying to think about, is Kelsey a must? Do you just try to get different and unique with somebody else? That's the tough part, is because a playoff Kelsey is real, man. He's the dude. 7 for 117 and 1 last week, 8 targets. Like I mentioned, DeAndre Hopkins and Juju are splitting routes. Noah Gray's running more routes than Juju. you can't really go into these like sneaky plays. So it's like, man, if you think Mahomes has a game where he can run a little bit more than usual and he throws a couple touchdown passes, I really have a tough time doing it without Kelce. That's kind of my take. I think Worthy's good too. Like Worthy's he's the leader of the clubhouse right now in the wide receiver room. He's kind of like last year's version of Rashee Rice, where it was very slow down the stretch, and then you saw him in the final 6 weeks kind of be the guy. That's really happened with Worthy. So it's chalky, but I think that's the favorite way to play it. And if you don't include Marquise Brown in those stacks, you will get some leverage. So it's obvious, but I don't really have anything like sneaky to say about it. I will say if they miss Taylor Rapp, a safety injury against Kelce in the middle of the field, I think is a big time issue. They will have, I think it's Cole Bishop. I think he's a rookie, will be out there in that spot. And I could see them trying to attack him in this game plan. So that's a key injury that I'll be monitoring to figure out how much Kelce I want to play, because obviously you're playing some of him, but it's just like, do you go all in? Do you come on underweight, a little overweight? That's the tough part for me on this slate.
Playoff Kelce is, I just sent you the game logs.
And they are beautiful.
They're not just beautiful. They're like, okay, let me find one where it's like, his worst game was 7 for 71. His worst. The majority of them are 25 plus DK points.
Yeah.
Like,
he's good.
He's been awesome. And we talked about Buffalo's secondary. The way that you beat them is the death by 1,000 paper cuts. Remember when we talked about that when they faced the Lions, when they faced the Rams at the end of the regular season? It just works, and Kelce is that player against 2-eye looks. It's just over and over and over again, Kelce. So I can't fathom coming in underweight. I get the game theory part.
Yeah.
But for looking at this game, it's like the only thing that you can poke holes in is saying, well, when they played him in week 11, he was 2 for 8. It's like, yeah, I don't really care about that one game.
Right.
Like
one game, small sample. Chips are down. They're going to Kelce. We just saw the Baltimore tight ends have a really nice game last week in this same matchup, Likely and Andrews. Oh, dude. Mark Andrews.
You shouldn't have even said his name.
I know, but I had to because of this past week. I feel so terrible for him. Those two combined for 9 for 134 and a touchdown. Should have also had a 2-point conversion. It's a good matchup. Like I think Kelce's pretty good chalk.
I think I love Mark Andrews even more. Let's play him this week.
I genuinely felt sad watching that game. I was like, oh no.
Oh yeah.
The fumble, the drop. Oh, man, tough scene.
I love how his team came behind him though.
Oh, me too.
They're like, we love this guy. Yeah. And also we're really bad when we analyze games of kind of reducing it down to one thing. Yes, it was 1 2-point conversion, but I mean, there's a lot of other things that could have gone a different way the rest of the game. So, anybody else on the Chiefs side that you are somewhat bullish on? I'm down on Pacheco. We took the under on his rush attempts. It's like you can play Hunt. He's totally fine, in cash type builds. I think he's going to project fine. Anybody else that you're like, I'm going to probably be a little bit more bullish on them? You said Hollywood?
Worthy, actually.
Okay, good. Because, I'll play some Hollywood. But I think Worthy's just the easiest one. I do think it's going to be some random Justin Watson, Hopkins thing that we've always been used to.
Noah Gray, someone like that. Like one of those randos where you're like, oh, it wasn't Kelce or Worthy on this drive. Like, didn't even realize that guy was playing this game. He pops up for a touchdown. That is definitely going to happen in this game. Like, just it always does in these Chiefs playoff games.
It's going to be Carson Wentz.
Dude, Andy Reid loves those secret plays at the goal line. Subs in Carson Wentz for a tush push.
Dude, okay, Carson Wentz, he shows up in my spreadsheet sometimes of like, okay, here's some of the best seasons of all time based on like efficiency, touchdown rate. Like him and Nick Foles show up every once in a while as Eagles greats that are like, man, they should have won it. They could have won MVP. I think, anyway. On the Buffalo side, I mentioned earlier, I think that they're built to win this game. So if I had to just pick based on sides and totals and everything else, like I'm been known to do, I would take Buffalo right now. Buffalo money line.
All right. Well, log in real quick. Let me place a bet on the Chiefs.
Here's what Betz always, like last week, he goes, "What? I mean, it's Josh Allen at home. What are the books thinking?" And I'm like, I kind of think it's the Ravens. This is the same thing. And you're going to go, man, it's Mahomes at home in the playoffs. Of course they're going to win. But I think I'm going to build as if the Bills win, but I worry about some of their rush success. That's what they've built their identity on all year. Like, it's possible that Buffalo trails, they can't run the ball as effectively, and yet Josh Allen is a superhero and they do win the game. When they played earlier this year, Buffalo just kind of controlled the clock the entire time. They had the ball 34 minutes. They had these long drives. They had drives of 8, 9, 12, 10, 12 plays where they scored. But it's not like they were great at running the ball. They ran for just 3.4 a carry. It was just that Allen wasn't pressured as much. So I do worry that the running game, that's what their identity is. I don't know if they'll have success, and yet I still think Buffalo has a chance with Josh Allen.
See, this is where I think we differ a little. We agree too much, people say, Kyle.
Bring it.
Do you think you know ball, brother? Have you looked at the splits recently with this Chiefs run defense? We took the under on Mixon's rush yards last week. It dropped 10 yards in close line value, which was just, I was telling my wife as the game was happening, I was like, hon, like, I know we lost this one. I'm sorry we can't go on vacation this year, but we got 10 yards of close line value. So
the value.
But Mixon had a good game on the ground. And really, when you look at kind of how it's gone recently, since week 14, they're 19th in EPA per rush. They're 14th in success rate. And, 14th in success rate, they're league average. But in the early, first 10, 11 weeks of the year, they were dominant against the run. So relatively speaking, they've fallen off, giving up almost 5 yards per carry in that sample. So I actually do like James Cook a lot. And that's one of the guys that'll be playing overweight the field. 6,900, we talked about the chalk build is going to be Saquon and probably Kareem Hunt at 5,400 or Eckler at that same price point. And James Cook kind of gets lost in the shuffle a little bit, I think. Now, it's a 2-game slate, so it's not like you're going to get him at 15%. But relative to those guys, I'd rather play James Cook and get different elsewhere at wide receiver or tight end. He's just super explosive. He's had, 23 and 17 carries his last 2 weeks, even though Ty Johnson will come in and even though Ray Davis got a goal line touch and Josh Allen's going to run, if you're betting on one guy that doesn't need 25 carries to do it, on this slate, Pacheco and Hunt are just plodding along, Brian Robinson plodding along. I think that guy is James Cook. So I like James Cook a lot on this slate. I'm definitely going to be overweight him.
Wow. Just wow. Because I disagree. And I've been a James Cook guy, Jimbo. We've talked about Jimbo a lot.
Yep.
I think the exact opposite.
Interesting.
Whatever you just said, take what Betz just don't even rewind back. Just delete it. Just move on. Because, KC is the best run defense when it comes to explosive rush rate. That's kind of what Jim Cook has been doing all year, is these big, long plays. And yes, when they get in close, he's actually become a goal line back, but he's been pretty touchdown reliant. 43% of his fantasy points this year came via touchdown, which is very different than the Jim Cook we got the previous 2 years. I think it's just going to be hard to get these big explosive plays. And Josh Allen, when they won the game earlier this year, you look and then you see the 3 rushing touchdowns between Allen and Cook and you go, man, they must have run the ball. They weren't very effective. Josh Allen dropped back to pass 45 times, and most of it was him just kind of creating. I mean, he only threw to his first read 42% of the time. That's his third lowest of the year. So a lot of it was him finding Khalil Shakir underneath. And he was actually, the best way to describe it is the drives that the Bills had against the Chiefs was very Mahomes-esque. A lot of them were just short area, continuing to hold the ball. 75% of his attempts were under 10 yards. That's per ESPN's Ben Solak. And so you're getting a lot of these short area things and then some shot plays to Amari Cooper and Keon Coleman. So I'm building as if Josh Allen has to be Superman. They're not as effective running the ball, and you can double stack Josh Allen on a smaller slate. Normally we would just say single stack, he's going to run it in, but I think you have to find the Bills wide receivers that come through, and I think there's going to be 2 of them.
Okay, well, who is it going to be? Because let me read you the routes from last week. It's going to be
Cook and Allen.
It is the flattest thing I've ever seen. So obviously Khalil Shakir is at the top, 20 routes. Keon Coleman, 15. Dawson Knox, 14. Dalton Kincaid, 13. Amari Cooper, 12. Curtis Samuel, 11. Mac Hollins, 10. I mean, they're like a hockey team out there with a line shift. All these guys are playing way too much to have anybody project well, which means if you just blindly run an optimizer, you're not going to get a lot of these guys because we can't give them median projections that look good. So this is where I was saying, in the large field lottos, throw some darts and just hope. I still think Keon Coleman might be my favorite of the bunch. Just
I think he is too.
hope you hit a long one and catches a touchdown. But like Shakir's the quote unquote best play, but he is going to be rostered as such, and he's more expensive. So it's tough, man. It's really tough on Buffalo.
Yeah, I think Keon Coleman, his salary on DK, they kind of just left him down there at 3,700. So I do like that. I went back and looked last year when they were in divisional round, these two teams played. Like, the guys running routes for them. So it was Diggs, who ran the most routes, 37. And then coming in second was Trent Sherfield with 31 routes.
You could have given me 15 guesses. I never would have got that.
I forgot he was on the team. So it is a rotation, and I do think that's hard. I think if you wanted to go Allen, Shakir, Coleman, I think it's totally fine. Now, Dalton Kincaid is still going to show up as a value when you sort with salary and targets per out run and what he gets. And on this slate, like, we're going to see a lot of 2 tight end builds. If you wanted to have Kelsey and Kincaid in the same game, go for it. Make him one of those pass catchers. But I think I'm just going to lean a little bit more into Josh Allen being Superman, scrambling, and he just runs more in the playoffs.
Yep, definitely. And against the Chiefs, too, he's averaged 10.4 carries, 56 yards, 0.6 rushing touchdowns per game. So, like you said, in these like gotta have it moments, and he puts the team on his back. And we saw him run at the goal line last week, scored twice with his legs. So definitely that's definitely an angle to take for sure on this slate. Real quick on the tight ends, you know, it's hard to say like a lot of positive things about either guy where they're not running a full route share, but the matchup is beautiful. KC has given up the most yards to tight ends this year. You saw Dr. Schultz get loose a little bit last week. It wasn't incredible, but, you know, fine numbers.
For him.
For him, it was fine. But I do think the matchup is there. You know, it's hard to... They don't get a lot of targets. That's the problem, Kyle. And those matter, apparently.
You need those.
You need those to score. But I think throwing a dart on even Dawson Knox at 2,600 on DK, I think is fine too.
Do you think Josh Allen being the most expensive quarterback will deter people from wanting to start their build? So just psychologically speaking, let's say you log in, the first position you look at is usually quarterback, but maybe on this slate you put in Saquon and then you start building. Where do you think he will be in terms of roster percentage? Like, it's going to be condensed. I think you can make a case for all 4 of these quarterbacks. Well, normally we'd have one dude be like, nobody's going to play him. I wonder if Josh Allen is going to come in lower than he should be for his ceiling, because I think he has the highest ceiling of any of these quarterbacks, even more than Jane Daniels.
I think it'll be in order of most to least popular, but I still think it'll be flat. I think the most will be Mahomes. Then I would say Jane Daniels, then Hurts, then Allen, strictly because of pricing. So yeah, one way to get just a stance on this slate, like you said, if you're super into Allen, if he is going to be 4th in roster percentage, which it's not like he's going to be 10 and Mahomes is going to be 50.
I think he'll be 3rd or 4th.
Yeah, something like that. Like, just play more Allen than the other guys, and that's your stance, right? So that makes a lot of sense too.
Yep. Any other takes you want to give on this game? Any more ball you want to throw out there?
I don't think so, man. I'm excited for this one. Should be a great watch. Hopefully, I'm in a good mood watching after the Eagles game. But I hope we don't see penalties affect this game, because we all have seen it, and like that's kind of the talk on Twitter. But I want to let the players decide. It would be awesome if that happened, and I just hope we get a good game, man. Should be a great watch.
Yep, I'll take Buffalo and I'll take the under. And my bracket, I'm feeling pretty good. My bracket for our company, I had Bills and Eagles. So
there you go. I forget who I had.
Yeah,
but for this game, I'm gonna be so lame. Most of the money, or most of the bets rather, have come in on Buffalo. The money line price has only gotten more expensive on Kansas City, which tells you I'm gonna play Kansas City. And did you just call me a square?
I don't know. You have to check the tape, man.
You're so disappointed in me. But Kyle, the second you thought the Bills were gonna win, this is just a lock. I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
Who would you rather the Eagles see in the Super Bowl?
Oh, good question. Probably the Chiefs. I don't know if that's wrong because they beat us before, or I think I'd rather play the Chiefs than the Bills.
I started doing this thing in my notebook where I write the storylines for the following week. So like, you know, before the Allen and Lamar game this past week, it's like, well, somebody's going to have a storyline that's going to be, well, this guy can't win the big game anymore. On the talking head shows, that's what they're going to say. So, it's going to be the Chiefs have done it again. And then the Eagles have this revenge narrative of, last time this is what happened and this is what's going to do. And you can write narratives for every combination if you want. But man, Josh Allen in the Super Bowl, that's what I want.
As a neutral fan of these two teams, I am rooting for that. I just think whenever people are backing a side and it doesn't move, usually the other side is right.
I will say the public is very much right now, the sentiment is on the Bills. So that's
what I mean.
That's usually not my brand.
But you're one of the public. Look at you. You're the public.
I'm just bought in. I'm just a drone, just a sheep.
Slate Breaker of the Week.
I'm going to give out a really good sponsor, and this one's actually kind of legit because I wear their shirts almost every single day. It's Homage.
Yes.
And they love our stuff. They also watch, some of their guys watch our Dynasty podcast, but I'm wearing a King Griffey Jr. shirt right now. That is one of my favorites. It's most days I wear a King Griffey Jr. I wore a Jackie Robinson one yesterday.
Dude, their shirts are awesome.
Not a sponsor, but I would wear them every single day, and it doesn't really matter, and they've given us free stuff before. So...
kind of makes them a sponsor.
That kind of does. There you go. For a segment that always has made-up sponsors, we kind of mentioned a sponsor for once. I will give my Slate Breaker first, because Betz, I don't know who yours is, but I am not doubling down. I am tripling down on A.J. Brown, this being the week. The Commanders have increased their reliance on man coverage over the last month. They're running it at 47%. That's the third highest in the NFL. And the Eagles' offense is second in success rate against man, third against single high looks. I think that's what you're going to need here. You're going to need to help out in the run game against Saquon. And I think A.J. Brown's going to be played a lot, maybe third or fourth in roster percentage of wide receivers. But last week against the Rams, it was a weather thing. And it was very clear they're just going to keep riding him. But against single high looks this year, he has a 36% target share, 56% air yard share, and 47% of the team's first read. He's an alpha. So you can gain a lot of leverage by playing him, or you can play him with Saquon together. I'm totally fine with that. But there are routes where Philly is trailing here. And I looked this up. Brown actually saw an increase in his targets per route run and his first read target share jumps when the team is trailing this year. So it's very clear, if things are going right, he becomes that much more important to the offense. And in game scripts like that, I think you can have massive leverage over Saquon. So I'm going to be playing Saquon and Brown together, but if you want Brown as the leverage piece, I think he's the dude.
I like it. Like it a lot. I was going to pick him if you did not, so I'm glad that we share that same opinion. I'm going to differ from you in the one different take we had on this game. I'm going to go with James Cook. 6,900. We already talked about the slate dynamics where it's at running back, you're probably playing, most lineups are going to only play two. One of those we know is going to be Saquon. And a lot of people are going to play somebody cheaper like Kareem Hunt or Austin Eckler. It's man, if you play Saquon with James Cook, just gets you a little bit of a different build. So I like that combination quite a bit. I will be overweight James Cook, and I will go with him for my slate breaker.
Nice. You play them together. I'll play a couple of James Cook lineups. I'm not going to just fade him.
With Josh Allen?
But with Josh Allen. I mean, yeah, it's such a small slate. I'm going to probably play every combination and still lose money.
Tale as old as time.
Betz is going to max enter and then win it all. Just because my family's sick, I didn't have time. I was being a good dad. You were being a good dad by securing your children's future.
There you go. We'll call it that.
If you want to play with us, go to ballersdfs.com. We'll direct you to our DraftKings League, Fantasy Footballers DFS, Borg, and Betz. We'll have some contests for Conference Championship Weekend, and then we are on to some Super Bowl stuff. So, Betz, sign us off.
Yes, sir. I will have a couple of slates for us to play the two-gamer, but also have Showdown for Eagles and Commanders and Showdown for Buffalo and KC. So come check that out on DraftKings with us and get in the DFS Pass. We'll have some props. Our articles are out today, and on Saturday, DFS Best Plays is out as well. Good luck this weekend. Go Birds.
Thank you for listening to another edition of the Fantasy Footballers DFS and Betting Podcast. Don't forget to visit us on the web at thefantasyfootballers.com.